I'm Mark DeGarmo, and with me today on Wednesday, May 27th, 2020 in New York, and Thursday, May 28th, 2020, going towards 10 a.m. in Melbourne, Australia, is Anne Harris. Anne, it's so lovely to have you with me today. Would you please introduce and describe yourself and your geographic location?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So I'm a New York, upstate New York born playwright and storyteller and spoken word artist. And I've lived down here in the Southern Hemisphere in Melbourne, Australia for the last 23 years. Since I've come to Australia, I came for a playwriting gig and stayed, and I've done a number of different things, but for the last 10 or so years, I've been an academic, a professor in education, creativity education, and performance studies. So my work is really moved between academic context, I guess, formal context like that, and more public context. I perform with my wife frequently, and we perform in both, conference kind of gatherings or academic settings, but also in more public fora like outdoors or in pubs or in spoken word gatherings. So my writing for performance continues that way. And I still have that New York working class perspective in everything that I produce. Most of my work is about queer and trans, non-binary, trans identifications, and also intercultural learnings from being a migrant, even between two kind of Western English speaking countries. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Anne, that contextualization. Before the pandemic, how would you have described your creative practice and work?
Yeah, so my work is almost all collaborative, and because I'm a research fellow, that's a full-time researcher, I'm so lucky to have funding from the university and time to travel, and I travel all over the world, and I love collaborating and doing locally specific collaborative co-creative work. So before the pandemic, I was traveling much of the year. I travel a lot in Asia. My current Australia Research Council funding was for a 4-year study, for a 4-year study in East Asia and Australia and the Pacific. So I traveled, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, Singapore, New Zealand, and part of the study is that I do applied theater. I do verbatim applied theater work. So we go a few times to each site and devise performance work with local actors. Of course, that's not possible under COVID, so that part has been paused. But a lot of the other kind of work that I do, speaking gigs and writing, collaborative writing gigs, we've been doing remotely. And I feel that it's been quite interesting. It's had pluses and minuses. It hasn't been all bad.
Well, that's good to hear. Well, thinking about the pluses and perhaps the minuses, how are you practicing your creativity and creative work during this time?
So I suppose it's just broken down now into the individual work that I do here at home. I have obviously more time at home. And I've also found that internally, my vibration, my pace has kind of slowed. It's a more kind of peaceful time for me. And so not intentionally, but I've done a lot more writing. Thick into a new book that I'd been sort of putting off called Creative Agency. And it is very much informed by COVID in the sense that I think the isolation, relative isolation of the pandemic has made me more aware of, but also made me spend more time in nature. I live near the beach. We have dogs, and we live in a beautiful part of the world about, 3 or 4 miles outside of the central business district, the downtown of Melbourne. So, I think it's made me focus much more on nature, and that's been very calming, and it's impacted my work. I do use theories about ecology and sustainability in my work, in my performance work, and my writing work, but it's definitely highlighted that for me. And then the other part of my work is, I think like many others, we've got these collaborative kind of projects going, which you and I were just speaking about on Facebook and other kinds of social media, where people are really sharing quite, I think, different sides of themselves due to the relative isolation and the change conditions of our lives.
Mm. Are there other ways that you've noticed that your creative practice and work have changed?
For me, I think the biggest change has been the staying still. And as I say, that's just given me a different internal pace where I think I'm writing differently, and in some ways producing more. And definitely, I think like many other artists, including writers, it's sort of driven me more to the tactile, to the material. So while painters might be engaging more with the materiality of their practice, I feel like it's driven me to the material as well. So I'm writing, but again, I think I'm writing more about the material and the tactile, the beach, the water, the garden, the dog, the sky, the birds. So I feel like structurally maybe now, except the staying still, but certainly content-wise, it's impacted what I'm doing.
That's marvelous. It almost makes me think about the poetics of the material.
Absolutely right. And I think that's emerging for so many artists that I know right now. Returning to certain kinds of poetics that impacted them at perhaps earlier times in their practice or in their lives, their creative lives, but also understanding the relationship between discursive and material creative process. Yeah, absolutely agree.
What advice might you give your peers and other artists?
About to thrive or survive COVID?
Yeah, things you're discovering that perhaps might have resonance with others without judgment, good or bad, or positive or negative.
I think this is starting to emerge from what I've seen, but I would encourage people to look more at doesn't have to be framed as positives, but the opportunities or the changes in what this pandemic has revealed or uncovered or made possible. And of course, that is race and class and geopolitically informed. So if your whole family is out of work and you're struggling to pay rent or to put food on the table, it's going to be much harder to see any positives from this or any opportunities. I understand that. I guess for me, and I acknowledge my privilege in saying this, in the beginning, it was like an unprecedented interruption in the way that we understood life and what was necessary to conduct life. And now I just feel that there's so many opportunities and so many people are saying, I sort of don't want it to go back to the way it was. That wasn't normal. We were murdering the planet. The planet has responded immediately and starting to repair itself. There's more of a focus on relationships and simple things and staying home and also just the opportunity to do kind of slow creative process in some ways I think is really beautiful. And I'm hearing that from a number of colleagues, both academic and artists. And I think that there are those beautiful sides of it, if we can call it that.
Well, thank you for that. I think people appreciate hearing your thoughts on that. You've mentioned a few of them. Are there other creative projects and upcoming opportunities that are in the works for you right now?
Excuse me. Yeah, Stacy and I have done a series of podcasts and around storytelling. Excuse me. What's your story? Melbourne was one of them.
Oh, very nice.
And we thought we would re-release those. Those are beautiful narratives about what the city meant to people, particularly migrants. It was really, we had a grant from the city of Melbourne to 1 week during Writers Week a couple of years ago to set up Vox Pop and a little interview salon down in the middle of town and public square, and interviewed people, both short and long format, and it was just beautiful about their relationships with this place. And that became a series of radio shows, podcasts that are on our website at creativeresearchhub.com. And we're thinking of re-releasing those because it's such an intimate art form, radio. But also we've done a series of podcasts of poets reading their own work called the Mobile Poetry Panels. We've got about 5 or 6 of those, I think. And so we're thinking of re-releasing those and doing more of that kind of quiet work. It's beautiful quiet work, and living in these AirPods and the like so much as we do now. It's quite a beautiful way to do performance, one-on-one performance almost. So we've been playing with that.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I look forward to catching up with you with that. Anne, is there anything else you might like to share?
No, I just want to say that I think we all in the arts owe an obligation to performing arts companies, and well, not all arts companies, not just performing. Of course, that's my orientation. Companies like Mark DeGarmo Dance, they just contribute so much, and we know that some won't make it through, but it's on us to petition government, petition funding agencies, to try and keep our brothers and sisters and others going, because we need them. And I guess my frustration, I don't want to end on a frustration, but if there was one, it's a governmental one or a social one, which is that, it seems to me that for everyone in these times of homeschooling and maybe staying at home to work or being out of work, that people are turning to the arts in unprecedented numbers. They are documenting the ways in which they're doing that. The live streaming of live performance of music, at-home music, or main stage productions or orchestras or dance companies. It's all streaming online, and people are watching that like never before. And they're understanding the value of that, and they're understanding why they are doing arts practices with their kids rather than just sitting them in front of a computer to do schooling for 8 hours a day, which no one can do. And yet, the funding for the arts here in Australia has been completely decimated. And I turn on the news every night, and all they talk about is getting the sports teams back on track so people can go watch the football or whatever. And I sort of don't understand that disconnect. So be that as it is, I would say to our friends and families and audiences, we have to take responsibility for supporting each other. And I hope we do that in greater numbers.
Thank you so much for that, Anne, that very important reminder in this time. Well, thank you, Anne Harris, for speaking with me today.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the chance to see your wonderful face again, and thank you for the great work that you do.